Assuming your Office 365 data is automatically backed up can feel a lot like this.
And once again, ladies and gentlemen,
Backing up Office 365 data with Veeam feels like this. So back it up with Veeam.
Hello, and welcome to Locate and Protect Your Sensitive Data in Office 365. I'm Erica Toelle, a Microsoft MVP from Seattle, Washington. So today we're going to cover a few things around working with sensitive data. First, I'll show you how to identify sensitive data in your organization. Next, we'll talk through a few ideas for how you can create an inventory of sensitive data so that you can review that with your data custodians or business users. Next, we can drive the conversation with those data custodians with actionable steps and data that they can use to make decisions. And finally, we're going to conduct policy simulations to try out and test the protections that we've planned for that sensitive data. So what is sensitive information? So sensitive information is basically information that you need to protect. And specifically, you want to protect that from disclosure to parties that should not have the information. So that means that you have to protect who has access to this data and also protect how that data is shared both inside and outside the organization. Now, this may be required for legal or for ethical reasons, or because you're protecting personal identifiable information, or to protect your company's intellectual property. So sensitive information can be things like bank account numbers, passport numbers, other types of national identity numbers, such as a social security number in the US, or it could be something that's custom to your organization. Microsoft has 100 built-in sensitive information types available, and more are being added all the time. Or you can always create a custom sensitive information type that's for something specific in your organization, like maybe a customer number that could be used to find other types of PII in the organization. So then what is a sensitive information type? Well, this is how you translate the definition of sensitive information into techie stuff that a computer can understand, basically. So in Microsoft world, a sensitive information type is defined as finding a pattern that you can identify by either using a regular expression or a keyword or a keyword dictionary. So you find that matching element or pattern, such as if you're looking for credit card numbers, that would be the credit card number itself. But there's a lot of things that could look like credit card numbers that aren't really credit card numbers. So to increase the confidence that the match is correct, we want to also hopefully find a supporting element to that credit card number. So that could be something like, it can also be a keyword, a regular expression, or a keyword dictionary. But just as a keyword example, it could be something like CCN, credit card, pound, or hashtag, the words credit card number, or something like Visa, MasterCard, or Amex. And we want to find those supporting elements within a certain number of characters of the pattern. So those two things together give us a confidence level that the match is actually correct and that we've really found a credit card number. So for example, we might want to be 85% confident that this is in fact a credit card number before we bother anyone with data protections. This isn't a perfect science, but it's really going to reduce the risk of with sharing information in your company. So the first thing I always ask customers is, what's your current strategy for protecting and governing sensitive and business critical data? So first of all, do you know where your business critical data or your sensitive data actually resides in Office 365? How are people using it? Are they sharing it? If so, how? Email attachment? Next, when people do share the data outside of your organization or even inside with other departments, do you have control of this data? How do you make sure that they're sharing it with people that should really have it and not making either a malicious or accidental mistake? And finally, if people do have protections in place, then it's often a conglomerate of multiple solutions together in order to provide all of these requirements or provide solutions to all of these requirements. So of course, Microsoft has an answer to this problem, and that is the information protection and governance compliance features available in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. It's part of a suite of compliance solutions, but that's the one we're going to focus on today: information protection and governance. So inside information protection and governance, there's really 4 solutions. So first is knowing your data. So understanding your data landscape and understanding what data lives where. For our purposes, we want to find the sensitive data, sensitive information. Next, how do we protect the data that we find? So there's a variety of protection solutions that you can employ to build a Microsoft-driven solution for your Office 365 data, and we're certainly going to go over those today. Next is to prevent data loss. So this is using our data loss prevention policies in order to either block the sharing of sensitive information in places like email and Teams conversations, or at least warning people of what they're doing so they can make an informed decision. And then lastly is govern your data. This is typically our retention and deletion policies. And of course, we have a whole nother presentation just focused on that. So today we're really going to focus on the first 2 with a little bit of the third. So first, let's talk about how to run a data classification pilot. So first, make sure you've clearly defined the problem that you're trying to solve. Typically, I see organizations trying to solve one of two things. First, they might have no idea what sensitive data they have in their organization, or even how to begin planning to protect it. Or number 2, they know they have sensitive data. They kind of know where it is, but they want to put protections and policies in place for that sensitive data. So our solution to this problem is to use the Know Your Data solution using Content Explorer. This is an E5 or advanced compliance feature, so unfortunately it's not available for E3 customers, but you can do other things I'll mention throughout the presentation if you have an E3 license. Next, we're going to pilot our policies using the Information Protection Policy Simulation tool. And then when we're done, we're going to monitor activity and adoption using our Activity Explorer tool, which is also E5. Yeah, so first we'll identify the sensitive data. Next, we're going to create an inventory of that data that we can review with the data custodians or business users. We want to understand, did they mean to put that data there? Is there a valid business reason? How is that data used? So we can make informed decisions about planning our protections. Next, we're going to simulate the protections that we have planned to see exactly how they'll work in our environment. So to make data classification available in your organization, these are the steps that you can follow. Now, I'll have this deck available after the presentation for your reference, but essentially there's 2 permissions roles in the Security Compliance Center, and you'll want to add people to them. So first is the Content Explorer Content Viewer role, meaning that you can view the contents of actual documents to see the sensitive data that might be in there. And the second is the Content Explorer List Viewer role. So this just allows you to see the locations where there's sensitive data, but not the contents of documents. Because we're literally dealing with the most highly sensitive data in your organization, that's why it's 2 separate roles, so not everyone can view the contents of the documents. And then you also need to be explicitly added to these role groups because it is so sensitive. All right, so how do we identify the sensitive data in your organization? For that, we're going to go straight to a demo. So here we are in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. This is the area that you will access in order to administer and configure all of your compliance solutions. And then here on the left-hand side, the first place I'm going to show you is the data classification solution. Now this is pretty new. It was just released in 2020. It is in general availability at this time. And the first thing we're going to see is an overview of the top sensitive info types in my organization. So I didn't need to turn on this report or run it in any way. It's something that was automatically generated by Office 365 to get me started with finding sensitive information types. Again, this is why you have to be explicitly granted access to this solution. Now, please take these findings with a bit of a grain of salt. They aren't always highly accurate, especially these international classification of diseases ones. I find there's a lot of false positives. As of right now, you can't tune the sensitivity of these to eliminate false positives. This is just to get you started. Then as you start implementing sensitivity and retention labels in your organization, you can also use this dashboard to track label usage. Things like the top sensitivity labels applied to content, top retention labels, locations where sensitivity labels are used, and also locations where retention labels are being used. So the next thing I want to show you is the Sensitive Info Types tab. This is where it'll list all of the sensitive information types that are available in your organization. So the first time you open this tool, you'll see the 100 items that are available from Microsoft. And then as you add your own custom sensitive information types will appear here also. If you want to create your own sensitive information type, you can do that here through the browser, or for even more granularity and control, configure it through PowerShell. So looking into our sensitive data, we're going to use this Content Explorer tool. So here I can see the sensitive information types that it's automatically found in my environment during the initial scan. It's also going to show me on an ongoing basis any sensitivity labels that are being used and retention labels. So you can use this Content Explorer solution to monitor label usage, just make sure it's being adopted correctly. But when we're just getting started, we're going to focus here. So I can click on any of these classifications, and then I'll double click the location to drill down further. So here I'm just going into my SharePoint environment, and then I have a list of all the sites that contain the sensitive information type I've selected. So let's look ahead in this one. And now I'm seeing all of the individual documents across all document libraries inside this SharePoint site. So if I would like to look into this further and I have the correct permission level, because one permission level was to do that drill down, and then you needed the other type of permission in order to actually view the contents of these documents. But I can actually go ahead and look at the document itself and see it in full fidelity. I can look at the source view or the metadata and details of that document just to kind of see and do a sanity check on this. Another thing that I can do is look into why this was tagged with this sensitive information type. So I'm going to click here. It's going to tell me the number of times it found the sensitive information type in the document, as well as the percent confidence that the match was correct. So this one's actually kind of low. And then on some documents, you're going to find more than one type of sensitive information, so it'll just show you all of the matches. So another thing that I want to show you is this export option. So the export button is going to export the exact information that's shown on this screen into a CSV file. So if you want to go talk to the owner of this SharePoint site about these documents, you can click export to get a list that they can go through and evaluate. There isn't, unfortunately, a way to run a report for this entire tool. You will need to go to each one by one to export that data. Sometimes I'll want to do some further analysis, maybe in PowerShell, or maybe when I'm configuring some of my policies later, I want to understand all the sites where I found the data, in which case exporting the list from this view is very helpful. So that's finding our sensitive data and where it lives. So what we want to do now is kind of take these types of sensitive information and do one of two things. Number one, go talk to the business owners, find out more about the information. Or number two, we could actually take this and go straight to the policy simulation tool that I'm going to show a little later in this demo. So let's talk a little bit more about creating this inventory for the business users or the data custodians. So the first option is the one I just showed, where you export and create an inventory. It's going to give you the metadata that's shown in the view as well, in case that's helpful. The next option is to look more closely at each individual document using that file metadata. For example, here you can see what user created the content or last modified it. This can be extremely useful, especially in large sites where the site owner might not even know necessarily about all the documents in the site. And then the third option is the one I mentioned, to go straight to not asking anyone about the data, just go straight to kind of simulating the policy. This one can be good because, as I mentioned earlier, the Content Explorer isn't necessarily very accurate. It just gives you a general idea. Whereas you can really tune the sensitivity and the confidence level and the specifics of how you're finding the sensitive data using these policies and get much more accurate results. So we'll show how to do that in just a couple minutes. Okay, so now we have maybe some information about our data. We're talking to our business users about it. And we need to start planning the protections we want to apply to the sensitive data that we find. So there's a lot of data protection options, and not just Microsoft 365, but also in Windows and different endpoints. They're sometimes hard to tell apart. These ones are specifically the options available in Microsoft 365, with a little cloud app security thrown in, just because you can use the sensitivity labels there as well. So the first thing you can do to protect data is really more about retention. So if it is supposed to be in your environment, you might want to retain it for a certain amount of time. So you can auto-apply a retention label to a document that contains sensitive information automatically and say, don't let users delete this before 3 years have passed. Another thing people do is they might not want sensitive data in their Office 365 environment. For example, it might not be the right place to put a unencrypted and plain text social security number. So it might be better to use a auto-apply retention label to actually get rid of the data and automatically delete it. Because contrary to the name, retention policies can also be used to delete content. So the next thing we can do, the retention actions and these sensitivity label actions at the same time. So you can have a retention label and a sensitivity label on one document, but not more than one of those types, not 2 retention labels or 2 sensitivity labels. So getting into the sensitivity label territory, the first thing we can do is create sensitivity labels and make those available for manual tagging. This is usually done in the Office client from a drop-down in the menu area. Now, I realized just now that I haven't told you what a sensitivity label is. So a sensitivity label is marking your content with labels such as highly confidential, general, public. There's usually quite a shorter list to choose from, and end users are usually pretty familiar with those classifications. So you'd create a sensitivity label that users can manually apply themselves. Now that is this option, as well as these 2 retention options, are available in the E3 license as well as the E5 license. Now, once we get into anything that says auto, that unfortunately is only available in the E5 or advanced license. So there's actually kind of 2 auto apply options for sensitivity labels. This one's been around for a long time, but you basically can say if you find a sensitive information type in a document or email, either automatically apply the sensitivity label and therefore the protections that go along with that label, or show users a message recommending that they apply it. This other auto-apply sensitivity label option, this is the new one. It just went into GA 2 weeks ago. This allows you to also auto-apply sensitivity labels, but instead of having it apply everywhere, it allows you to select the location, such as specific SharePoint sites, specific OneDrive accounts, specific email accounts. The other thing you can do is protect a container of information. And this is available in Office 365 E3 as well. So you can apply a sensitivity label policy to a SharePoint site, a Microsoft team, or an Office 365 group. Now, it is important to understand that when you apply a sensitivity label to one of these containers, it doesn't automatically apply the label to all the documents that live in that SharePoint site. What it does is allow you to either prevent external users from being added to the location if the sensitivity is confidential, as an example. It allows you to block access to the site or team from unmanaged corporate devices. And then I'm forgetting the last one. Darn it. I'll think of it later. Sorry. Okay, so now we've covered these options here. The next thing you can do, which is also available in E3, is use a data loss prevention policy to block data essentially in transit. So you try to send an email that contains sensitive data, you can block it from being sent. Or you try to share a Teams social security number in Teams, you can block it from being sent. And you can also choose whether to only block that data if there's external users that are on the email or are members of the team, or block it for everybody. And then just as an honorable mention, Cloud App Security is a very popular complementary technology to the Office 365 data protection options. It allows you to protect sensitive information in other cloud locations, such as Box or Google Drive. But it does use the building blocks we're talking about in this presentation in order to do that. And so that's why I just give it an honorable mention so that you're aware it exists. All right. So now let's get into the fun part, which is the policy simulation option that I mentioned earlier. For this, we're going to jump back into the demo. Okay, so in order to actually be able to, well, let me show you the end state first. So after we go through all the setup that I'm going to show you, we go over here to this auto label option. And here we're going to be able to see all of the information protection policies that we've created, and then whether or not they're in simulation mode or turned on in the organization, or if they've been built but not in simulation, it'll be marked as off. So as an example, let's go ahead and look at this one. So here you can see that I've been running this data simulation for 12 days. So it's going to take at minimum 24 hours to run the simulation. And that's going to scan all of the content currently in your organization. Now, you might want to have it run longer just to see, does this change over a few days? Like, does the number of policy matches increase or maybe decrease a lot? But we're able to see the policy matches per location. So here we can see all of our matches are in SharePoint. And then we can see some specifics about what exactly matched. Then I'm also able to view the exact documents that matched the policy. And again, this is much more accurate than the Content Explorer tool. Let's see if that brings up our results. Well, that's always exciting when your demo isn't behaving. Let me see if we can pick the other policy that I have simulating. Always takes a second for these to load. So, it's not just you when it takes a long time. It does always take more than 10 seconds. All right, so hopefully now we'll see some matched items. So there's been some wonkiness in the Compliance Center the last 2 days. I am not the only one that has noticed it. So it could be that it just temporarily isn't showing us these documents. Actually, I tried to record this session yesterday, and it completely removed the information protection solution from the Compliance Center. That doesn't happen often, so just a little fun times there. Okay, so just imagine you saw a list of documents. It's exactly the same thing that was in Content Explorer. You can open the document, you can view the metadata, and that's about it. I really wish they would highlight the data that exactly matched the policy, but alas, that's not in there yet. All right, so how did we get to that simulation? Well, the first thing we had to do was actually create a sensitivity label. So to do that, these are the fields available. So I'm just gonna put in fake name and description so we can move through to the fun stuff. So there's a lot of protections that go along with the sensitivity label. So for example, maybe this is my confidential label, and I want anything that's confidential to be encrypted using basically IRM. So to do that, I can either assign specific permissions. So if this was, for example, a confidential label for the finance organization that I'm only going to deploy to users in the finance organization, I might assign permissions so that only members of the finance group can access this document. So these are some pre-built groups that you have available. And then if you actually want to configure the permissions for each of these groups, you can set different permissions for, who owns the document, who authored it, people that are reviewing it, viewing it, or you can create a custom policy. And then these are all of the different options you have for what people are able to do. So you can see, for example, I can block the forwarding of an email. I can block people from replying all. Maybe we should use that a little more often. I can block it from being printed or saved, or, you can read the list there. I also could choose to let users assign permissions when they apply the label. So it would basically force them to assign the permissions. And then I have these settings. Oops, excuse me. These settings in Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. If I want to assign the permissions now, I have some extra options. I can set the content to expire. So this one's actually quite useful if I want to, leave the permissions available to everybody. But maybe I have a pricing sheet and it's being sent to tons of people outside my organization, and I know that pricing sheet's refreshed every 90 days. I can actually have this document expire on a specific date, and no one will be able to open the pricing sheet and use it after that specific date, so there's not misinformation out there. You can also, prevent people from accessing this downloading this document to their computer and then taking their computer offline and opening it. Or you can allow offline access or require, maybe for salespeople that are working at customer sites and can't connect to the corporate internet all the time, or to an internet, to the internet. You can say they need to check in maybe, every 10 days. So those are the encryption options that are available. Note that you can also use a label to remove encryption as well. Say if you're going from, your documents marked as confidential and you're relabeling it as public because it's now, a product that's been released, you can remove the encryption when it's relabeled as well. For content marking, this is just a good visual indicator for people, that this is a confidential document. And I might want to put that in the header, adjust the font size, the color, or the text. You can do that, a watermark, a header, or footer. Common request from customers is to make the watermark change the opacity so it's light in the background, and unfortunately you can't do that yet, but hopefully coming soon. That'd be nice. Okay, so there's also a private preview for labeling the containers, labeling SharePoint sites, Office 365 groups, or Teams. I've enabled this preview using PowerShell, so you're now seeing this option in my labels. If you go into your environment and you don't see it, it's because you haven't gone through the PowerShell steps to turn this on. So here I can set a couple things. So number one, this is the one I forgot. So you can say whether or not the group is forced to be public, forced to be private, or just let users choose. So you might say if it's a confidential site, it's private. You can choose whether or not to allow external users. If this is confidential, I'm going to leave that unchecked. And then allow access from unmanaged devices. So can people access this from any device? Can they access it from any device, but it needs to be only from the web rather than from, say, a mobile app or something? Or you can block access from unmanaged devices. This is because, for example, if somebody has a jailbroken phone that could have malware on it, if it's not a corporate managed device, then that malware could potentially get access to your sensitive data. Or, corporate managed devices have policies around running virus scans, making sure your Windows updates have been applied. A lot of times they restrict you from being able to install your own non-approved programs. So that's why you might want to control this. And then this is the first auto labeling option that I mentioned. So this allows us to find content that has sensitive information in it. So I could choose, well, we wouldn't want to choose all of them. Let's say we want to find U.S. driver's license numbers and, should be sure it would be nice if they had these in alphabetical order. Let's say that. And this is why the policy simulator is so much more accurate. Because in all of these options, you can set the accuracy level and the number of instances it has to find in order for it to be considered a match. When you first start using these, you have to test them because you're not going to magically guess the accuracy and the instant count on your first try. It takes, you test it, you adjust it, then you test it again, and then you adjust it some more until you found that balance between not having too many false positives or too many false negatives. But anyway, that's where you adjust it. If you have too many false positives, then you want to bump up that accuracy. You probably want to bump up the instance count too, because if you're just finding one number in a document, it might not actually be a number, and your risk is much lower than if there's, 4 instances of it. So when these conditions are met, you can automatically apply the label or recommend that users apply the label. And then you can display a message to the users when the label is applied. Now, if you have an E3 license, you're not going to see this screen. So if it's missing, that's why. If I leave it off, it's just going to be available for manual labeling. Then I'd review my settings and click submit. So something I want to mention is, especially if you're messing around with this in your production environment to do these simulations, you don't want to randomly create sensitivity labels, especially if they have encryption. This is because once you've created the labels, it's actually quite difficult to delete them. Especially if they have encryption, if you remove the label, there's a higher chance of losing the encryption key to the document. Microsoft has a great help article on deleting or removing sensitivity labels. Please read that before you go in here and mess around with this. And with that scary warning, I'm going to cancel out. And then my labels would appear here on the list. Now, the order is really important. So the higher the number, the higher the priority of the label. Especially when you get into auto applying, it's going to look at that label priority and apply the higher priority label if there's 2 possible labels that could apply. If I want to publish these to be used manually by an end user, I would do that. I can select the sensitivity labels I want to be available to them. And then I choose specific users or groups. So I can include, everyone in the organization, or I can create more specific settings for different departments or different groups of users. I can apply a label by default, So maybe if I'm in the finance organization, I'll automatically mark all those as confidential. Everyone else may be general. I can require that users provide a justification to remove the label or move it to the lower level. So that's where the prioritization comes in. I can require users to use the labels, and then I can also give them a link to a custom help page. I would name the policy. Then I would click submit. Now it's going to take up to 4 hours for these to appear for the end user. But once it does, it looks something like this. Here's my sensitivity labels. You can see here's the description that's shown to end users. I can also show this as a bar instead at the top to make it quite easy. And then that help and feedback, that's the list to the custom, or the link to the custom help page that it just asked me for in the configuration options. So that's where that shows up. All right, so now I have some labels available to end users to manually deploy. Now let's look at this other auto labeling option. So for this, it's a little bit the same, a little bit different, because it wouldn't be Microsoft if there was just one way to do things. I'm just going to do a custom policy because it's just easier to show. But if I wanted to, I could use one of these templates. And all it is it's grouped together. These are 3 different sensitive information types. It's just grouped them together into like one package. Just make it easier on you. But I'm going to use custom because that's more fun. Okay, so this is where this type of auto labeling is a little different. Because before, it was just asking me to automatically apply the label if it found the sensitive information type. But for this one, I can actually choose locations. So this just went into GA, and the limits on these are still a bit low. I'm like 90% sure these numbers are correct. But for example, you can only choose 10 SharePoint sites in an auto apply policy. And I think you can only have 10 auto apply policies in your tenant right now. Of course, they are raising those limits. If I misspoke, you'll see a box right about now saying what the real limits were. So sorry about that. So for the ease of the demo, I'm going to choose a user, because if I did SharePoint or OneDrive, I'd have to go find the exact URL and paste it in there. It doesn't just give me a site of all, or a list of all the sites, unfortunately. See, I'll show you. Yep, I'd have to type in the whole URL. Oops, no. Hide the toolbar. Good for visual aesthetics. Bad for accidentally clicking. Let's see if I can go away. Okay. All right, so I can use what are called common rules or advanced rules. Because I only chose one location, I'm going to use common rules. If I'd chosen multiple locations, I'd use advanced rules just to define specific rules for every location. And here's how I create the rules. So I'm going to call this a high amount of information. Oh, helps if you don't have the caps lock on. And here's my conditions. So there's 2 conditions here. So our tried and true favorite, content contains sensitive information types. But there's another option that's only available in this auto labeling, which is content is shared. So first, let's just do this one. We know what it is already. I'm just going to randomly choose stuff. Again, you can see here I can adjust the accuracy and the instance count in order to reduce false positives or false negatives based on your testing. And then I can also set multiple rules and say, you know, all of these need to be found, or any of them, which allows you to really customize how these policies find information. And then content is shared. And this is where you can say, and it's only an and, I only care if the content is shared with people outside my organization. If it's inside, I trust them, it's fine. Or you can say only with people inside my organization. So you might call this inside organization as an example. You might say, I only care about this if there's like a lot of stuff found. And then you would, this just says create, even though it's hidden now. Let's see if we can fix that. No, it just hates me now. All right. Well, we're going to do that so at least I can see the button. Okay, so then that might be inside organization, and then we would create another one for outside. We would choose the same sensitive information types, except for now, if there's any instances of it with people outside our organization, then we want it to apply, and because we're going to basically block them from being able to see it. So remember these rules, and I can turn those on and off also in my testing and simulations. If you need to isolate a problem, you can turn off certain rules. But remember these rules here, because I'm going to show you where these show up again. So this is where I would choose what label I want to actually apply when these conditions are met. Just choosing a random one. Okay. So here's where you can choose to run the policy in simulation mode, or just leave the policy off until you're ready. We're going to run it in simulation mode, and then I would review this and click create policy. I just did junk settings, so I'm going to cancel. But just to tie it all back together, here we are. This one's one of the ones that's been running in simulation mode for 12 days. And like I said, it always takes more than 10 seconds for whatever reason. Okay, so remember when I said remember the rules? That is down here. So imagine this said inside the organization and this one said outside the organization. But this really allows you to see, what exact policies you set up that are being matched. So if you're really trying to hone in on what data specifically is being found, create a couple rules for kind of the same thing with a couple different variances on it, and really kind of hone in on what it is you're actually finding. And remember I said things randomly haven't been working the last 2 days? Yeah, I know you remember that this didn't say 0 when we looked at it earlier, right? It's just this week. Who knows? So I hope you enjoyed this kind of whirlwind overview of information protection and the new Know Your Data content inventory solution and some of the new auto-apply options. I know this is a recording, so I'll just say, if you do have any questions, I love getting emails. Unlike some people, I think it's really cool to geek out on this stuff with people. It's all kind of new. Information protection and IRM have been around in some iteration for quite a few years, but still, when it comes to your organization and you're sitting there looking at your policies and looking at your data, you're going to come up with questions I would have never thought of in a demo environment. And it's so much fun to try to figure them out. So that being said, here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And especially if you have a cool problem that you don't know how to figure out, because I live for that. Anyway, thanks for joining us at SharePoint Saturday Omaha. And I hope you're staying safe at home and enjoying your time. Have a great rest of your day.